Good morning. It's great to have everybody with us here this morning. It's a nice, cold, wet, rainy morning, so it's a good day for us to be inside together, and we're grateful for it. We're grateful for the opportunity to be here and to worship God. I do want to encourage everyone to make sure that we're inviting our friends and our family to our Friends and Family Day next week. It'll be here before we know it, and we want to make sure that everybody feels welcome and is invited. And as part of that as well, I want to just make mention that if you're visiting with us and you're looking for a church home, we'd be glad to have you. If you are visiting and you're just passing through, hang around for just a little bit and let us talk to you after worship. We'd love to get to know you. We might get to know you too much. We like to talk here. And I know that's scary to hear from the preacher right before he's about to preach, but we really enjoy getting to meet people. And we love each other and we want to serve God together. And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a way in which we can serve God. We're going to talk about our discipleship. You know, this year we've been focusing at the beginning of the month. We've been focusing each month on some principle or some practice for us to focus on and meditate upon. We've looked at things like fasting or Sabbath or Scripture or prayer. We've looked at different things that kind of help us to see, okay, what do we need to do in our disciplines, our spiritual disciplines, if you will. The word discipline itself just simply, well, it can mean a multitude of things, but it simply means maybe a thought or a practice, a teaching. And if you were a disciple, you are one who subscribes to or follows after that teaching. And so as disciples of Christ, we are students at the feet of Rabbi Jesus, the teacher, the Messiah, the one true God in the flesh. And today we're going to talk about what God has us to see and us to do as a way of being generous or giving. Now, this is not just in regards to the collection. This is just generous and giving in our day-to-day lives, not just a collection. But yes, it does include the collection, but not just a collection. When we think about generosity, one of the things that maybe pops into our mind, often at least when I was a kid, I felt this way. I always thought that at some point that you would just start to give, more. When you're a kid, maybe conveniently somebody left $1 up here. We'll go ahead and put that in there. That wasn't planned, I promise. If that's yours, I'm sorry. You've given to the Lord. Good job. We often think, okay, in the future, I'm going to give more in the future. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to put forth effort. I'm going to maybe get a savings account just a little bit more. I'm going to free up a little bit more space in my budget. And one day, I'm going to give back in a truly amazing way. At times, you might even play what would happen if I came into a large sum of money? Well, I'd give back. I'd give unto the Lord. I'd help the church. I'd help the needy. I'd help those who are without. And all those things are grand and wonderful and things that are to be looked forward to or to achieve, that you work hard every day to kind of achieve that goal of giving more. But the only problem is that God's pattern for generosity and giving isn't working hard so that one day you can give. It is using where you are at currently to do what you can do. It is using the position that you are currently in, not something to be worked towards, but something that you can do now. Something that you possess now can be given. We're going to talk about generosity. We're going to talk about it in 3 different points this morning. I want to encourage you to open to Luke chapter 12. We're going to look at Luke chapter 12 here in just a moment. We're going to look at Luke 12, 2 Samuel 9, and Exodus chapter 3 and 4. But we're going to spend some time on Luke 12 here in just a moment. So if you're looking for 3 passages to kind of note, Luke 12, 2 Samuel 9, and Exodus 3 and 4. We'll get to Luke 12 in just a moment. The first thing I want us to point out about generosity is kind of to reflect very quickly on some of the other things that God has showed us through His Word this year that we focused on. When we talked about things like fasting, well, fasting is God's solution to not only the producing of self-control, but also the ability to stand with the poor. And then we looked at maybe things like Sabbath. God's design for rest is to see those who are weary or burdened and give them rest. When we look at prayer, that is God's answer for one who feels lost or distressed or overcome with emotion or anxiety. It's God's answer to those things. See, these practices that we're examining, they're not just maybe a good idea. They're God's answer to some real problems that we face within this life. And what we see in generosity is we see first and foremost that generosity is God's answer to greed. Generosity, giving, is the enemy of greed. If greed is seeking to gain or to build up or to store up, then generosity is removing those things which we have gained or built up or stored up. It's removing the thing from our heart that should not be there in the first place. You maybe look at passages like Matthew chapter 6 and verse 21. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. No man can serve both God and mammon. You know, a few things to note about this passage here, very important passage. We'll get to it even when we study in our Sermon on the Mount series on Sunday morning Bible class. But in Matthew chapter 6, 24, in the midst of his, kind of right smack dab in the middle of his Sermon on the Mount, he uses this warning here. Notice I said it's not a command, it's a warning. Because it's not a command that you should not serve two masters. It's a warning of man's inability to serve two masters. No man is capable, no man can serve two masters. He will either be loyal to the one and despise the other, or he will love the one and hate the other. We cannot, in our hearts, in our ability, in who we are, serve two masters. So you must make the decision. Do I serve God or mammon? Mammon is simply a word that is used to provide maybe a concept of substance or of money or of something on this earth. We cannot serve the things of this world and God. Notice that both of which are also described as masters. These are not things to be ruled over. I never rule over God. I never rule over the world. But I can be subject to either one of these. I can be submissive to the way of the world, or I can be submissive unto my Father. And so which do I choose? Two masters are an option. I'm incapable of serving after both. I must choose one. Obviously, the right answer would be to serve after God. Or what about 1 Timothy 6 and verse 10? Some of the encouragements that Paul gives concerning Timothy is warnings about some practical matters, not only within his life, but also within his ministry. And one of the warnings that he gives in 1 Timothy 6:10 is very, very important. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Notice, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Now, if you're anything like me, I grew up here, which many of you did, but you grew up here, you listened to, preachers throughout the years. Most people make the same exact point about this. It's the same point that you've probably heard 1,000 times before. It's not money, it's the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Absolutely. It is the love of money. There's a difference. It's not money. It's not wrong to have possessions. It's not wrong to have money. It's wrong to be given over to it, to love it. That's not what I want us to focus on. I want us to notice that phrase that is used. It is the root of all kinds of evil. We mentioned Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. One of the things that Jesus mentions in that sermon is the "you have heard but I say unto you" statements. And in that, he talks about some roots within our hearts. He says, you have heard that it was said unto you of those of old, you shall not commit murder, you shall not murder. But I say unto you, do not have hatred in your heart towards your brother without cause. You have heard that it has been said unto you, do not commit adultery. But I say unto you, do not look upon a woman to lust. What is Jesus trying to get us to understand? That when we allow for something to take root within our hearts, things begin to get dangerous. You want to avoid murder, don't allow for hatred to root within your heart. You want to avoid adultery, don't allow for lust to take root in your heart. You want to avoid all kinds of evil, don't allow for the love of money to take root within your heart. I don't think it would take us very long to create a list, probably 10 pages long, of some of the evils and some of the wicked things that we see and witness in this world, that at its root cause is greed. We see the oppression of people. We see the loss of life. We see people thrown out flippantly. We see marriages end. We see lives completely uprooted and changed, all in the sake or for the sake of building up somebody or filling up their heart with more and more greed. Greed is the root of all kinds of evil. So why does God give us generosity? so that he can take that which is a root of all kind of evil, the love of greed, or the love of money, which is greed. He can remove that from our hearts, and he can remove all those kinds of evil. Is that not Jesus' intention within his teachings? That we would be removed of all the things which might lead us astray from God? That we would have removed from our hearts the things that which would lead us to doing evil and wicked things? If you knew that you were going to do something evil and wicked, you probably would want to remove that greed from your heart as well. But that's the power of greed, is that oftentimes it kind of hides itself. It slowly creeps in our hearts. Notice Matthew chapter 16, verse 26 as well. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his own soul? You know, when I've often thought about this verse, I've often focused upon the key aspect of what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Somebody pointed out to me recently a very important message for me to consider. Somebody pointed out, he said, you know, oftentimes it is the case that the price tag for our soul is not the whole world. We often sell ourselves short very quickly. It doesn't take the whole world to lead our hearts away from God. Sometimes it can just be one thing or one person or one word. Sometimes it can be just one meditation of the heart, which pulls away our focus from the Lord. Maybe it would be better for us if the cost of our souls was the whole world, because at least then it would have cost something. But oftentimes we give away the focus of our heart unto something else besides God for far less than the whole world. Notice with me, I told you we get to Luke 12. Notice with me, Luke chapter 12, verse 16 through 21. There was a certain rich man. In fact, it says the ground of a certain rich man, as he's speaking in a parable, yielded plentifully. Verse 17 tells us, and he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do since I have no more room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns. I will build greater. And there I will store up my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose those things be which you have provided? For so is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. Notice a few things about this passage as well. Notice that it was the ground of a certain rich man. Now I know we've got a congregation that is made up of some farmers. So we understand the toil and the labor, or we understand the work that goes into producing vegetables or fruits from the ground. But to kind of be serious and to really think about these things for a moment, where do those blessings truly come from? You can put in a whole lot of work. You can put in a whole lot of effort. But if God doesn't want a plant to grow, guess what's not going to happen? That plant's not going to grow. So when we see that the ground of this rich man had produced plentifully or fruitfully, what are we seeing? God has blessed this man richly. God has given this man a many blessing. Let me ask you something. How many of us within this congregation today, within this auditorium today, how many of us are blessed people? If we're being honest with ourselves, every hand in this auditorium would probably have to go up. I don't know about y'all. Sydney, I mentioned that Sydney and I cleaned every nook and cranny of our house in Bible class. I told y'all we did a deep clean yesterday. You know what happens when we open up our pantry door? What do we see? We see a pantry full of food. When we open up our fridge, guess what we see? A fridge full of food. When we go to pick out outfits within our closet, guess what we have? Closets full of clothes. Which might be surprising to y'all. I do have clothes other than black polos, but and I'm branching out. I'm getting better. But we look at these things, and what's some of the things that immediately come to our mind when we open up those doors? We've got a pantry full of food, but what do we say? We have nothing to eat. We go to fridges full of food and drinks, and what do we say? Well, I've got nothing to eat or drink. We go to closets full of clothes. We open them up. What do we say? I've got nothing to wear. We are so blessed that we are blinded by how blessed we are. We are so blessed that we don't even understand to the extent of where we have been blessed. The ground of a certain rich man has yielded plentifully. God has blessed this man with much. Could that same statement not be said of us? God has blessed this people with much. God has blessed this people with plenty. And notice the mentality. This mentality kind of comes into his mind. He's given a dilemma. I can either take this great amount of blessing that God has given me, and I can help out those who are in need, or I can tear down my barns and build bigger barns. Notice the mentality here. He's already got barns to fill. There's indication, especially during a time that didn't have grocery stores, it was important for him to store up something to be able to survive. He's already got barns that will allow for him to store up what he needs. But God gives him an excess of what he needs. He meets his needs and then some. And this man's mentality is not to go and use that to help others, but to build bigger barns, to eat, drink, and be merry, and to be lazy, to sit back. God has provided us some pretty big barns already, and He's filled them with blessings. And oftentimes what is the case, our mentality is, I want more. You know what that is? There's a little word for that. It's greed. I want more. The wanting of more, the striving for more. Even though a need or a necessity has been met, I still want more. That's greed. What is God's answer? Or what is God's solution to greed? It's generosity. In fact, I made the point that it is the enemy of greed. Why? Because for me to be generous, I must not have a love of stuff. For me to be generous, to love God and to love others as I love myself, I by nature have to be able to remove my desire from my own heart for something and replace it with the desire to help someone. This man's issue was not his building up. This man's issue was his plan to live frivolously, and God calls him foolish for it. This man planned to use what God had given him, even beyond that of what met his needs. He planned to use it to be lazy. But God said, no, you fool. You fool. You planned for many years and his soul was required that night. Let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 9. You'll notice here there's kind of a bit of a narrative here in 2 Samuel 9. There's going to be the same in Exodus. So if you haven't opened anywhere, if you open up 2 Samuel 9 and you open to Exodus 3, you'll be here for basically the rest of the sermon within those two passages. I want us to notice that sometimes generosity is simply a seat. Sometimes generosity is as simple as offering someone a spot at your table. Verse 1 of 2 Samuel 9. Now David said, is there anyone who is left of the house of Saul that I may show kindness to him for Jonathan's sake? This is a common question asked by kings with an uncommon intention. A common question from kings would be, is there anyone left of the previous lineage of rulers? Saul was king, Jonathan was his son, they have both died, 2 Samuel 4:4. And now I have ascended to the throne as David. I'm in this position. The common action of kings would be to find those descendants and to eliminate those descendants so that throne would never be threatened again. So that's a common question. Is there anyone left of the house of Saul? But his uncommon action or his uncommon motive here is he says that I may show kindness to him for Jonathan's sake. So common question, is there anyone left? Uncommon motive, so that I may show kindness. You can already see that there's a little bit of an interesting thing. Something I do also want to point out kind of before we move. Is David a blessed man? Absolutely. He's the king of Israel. His son, Solomon would be even greater blessed than he, being the richest man ever. But David is an incredibly rich and blessed man. And notice what David's solution to generosity is. He's taking what he has and he's providing generosity. Notice what it is. He says in verse 3 and 4, he asks that same question again. Is there anybody left so that I may show kindness unto them? His servant Ziba says that there is a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet. He is in a place called Lo Debar. Okay, there's two interesting things about that. First of all, that Mephibosheth, that's his name, Mephibosheth, fantastic name by the way. Mephibosheth is lame in his feet. Okay, in biblical times, that was almost a death sentence. You had a few options. You either, one, came from a rich family like Mephibosheth did until his family until his family's lives were ended in battle. So you either relied upon the rich blessings that your family had, or you were a beggar. That was the life of somebody who was lame. Either rely upon your family's riches or on somebody else's generosity. So you've got this man who cannot produce for himself, who otherwise would be seen of no value, who by other kings would have been killed simply because he was who he is. David seeks after this Mephibosheth who is lame in the feet, and notice he finds himself in a place called Lo-Debar. Lo-Debar is a very interesting and fun name. In fact, if you look at what Lo-Debar means, it's this very deep and sincere word. Okay, you ready for it? It means not a pasture. A lot of real fun meaning, right? Lo-Debar, not a pasture. That's all it means. You know, you look at a parking lot where you say, well, that's not a pasture. Okay, Captain Obvious, all right? You got Lo-Debar. This is not a pasture. But what does that mean? What does not a pasture mean? You're talking about biblical times. When produce was important, when man's ability to produce from the ground was of great necessity. A place called Lo-Debar is basically the equivalent of Mephibosheth being lame in the feet. This man who cannot produce for himself is in a land which does not produce of itself and solely relies upon what? Upon others' ability to produce for them. The lame man in the place of not a pasture is totally reliant upon the generosity of others. He would have to live a life as a beggar. Notice with me verse 7. Notice the very first words out of David's mouth. Do not fear. David, I just lost my dad and my grandfather. David, I just lost my income source. David, I just lost my ability to eat, to have my needs met. And now I'm being called to be in the presence of the person who is now sitting on my grandfather's throne, who oftentimes would seek to remove me from this earth simply because I am who I am. And David says, do not fear. Why does David say do not fear? Well, notice what he says after that. He says, do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for your father Jonathan's sake. And I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your grandfather, and you shall eat at my table continually. Eat bread at my table continually. Do not fear. Why? Because not only am I not here to take your life, I'm here to restore you back to a position of authority by giving you your grandfather's land, all of his possessions. I'm giving you your grandfather's land. And you have a spot to eat at my table. There is no greater generosity that could be shown in this moment than to welcome Mephibosheth to his table. This man who is in a place of non-production, and he himself is physically unable to produce, is now given the land of his grandfather and is welcomed at the table of the king. That's generosity. That's love. That's generosity that is being shown. Notice even in verse 11, as for Mephibosheth, he said, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. So it goes further than just eating at his table. He is adopted into my family. He shall be like one of my sons. There is no belly more full, maybe than that of the king, with the exception to the king. There is no belly more full than the prince's bellies. And he says, he shall sit at my table like one of my sons. You know, there's an interesting thing that Isaiah introduces us to. It's called the Messianic table, or the Messianic feast. This is the feast that is described that it will be a feast that we eat with God for eternity, that we will be in His presence and we will have an abundance. And notice there's some parallels between the Messianic feast and that of what we're seeing in 2 Samuel 9. Those who are unable to produce for themselves, in a place which is of no produce, being welcomed to the table of the king to eat continually, to have restoration, to have your needs met, to be as one of his sons. Be reminded of what was read for us in Romans 8, verse 15 through 17. We will cry out, Abba, Father. Father, why? Because we will be as his adopted sons. We will be heirs according to his kingdom, like that of his son. We will be at his table as his children, as his sons and daughters. All these things point us toward the direction of saying, okay, what we're seeing David do with Mephibosheth is what we're going to see God do for the faithful. How we're welcome to his table, how we're given restoration. And all of that is ultimately a show of generosity. Notice in verse 13, so Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, the holy city. And he ate continually at the king's table, both continually, never ending, so he never goes without, and at the king's table always had an abundance. But notice this last phrase here, and he was lame in both his feet. He was lame in both his feet, and he was still unable to produce. But none of that mattered. Why? Because he had a seat at the table. Mephibosheth wasn't able to provide himself with food, but that didn't matter. Why? Because he always had a seat at the table. You know, you might think, okay, Kase, that's good. It's important that we understand the relationship between David's feast with Mephibosheth and the Messianic feast, and that's good and important. But what difference does it make to me? Well, you might not have a table set like a king, but most of us have a table. In fact, especially for our kiddos, they're all, sadly, most of them are back in school now. Sorry, guys, we had a great time with y'all this summer. They're back in school. And guess what you have at school? A bunch of tables. A bunch of tables. And guess what is surrounding those tables? People and conversations and love and fellowship and communion. And what we see is we see an opportunity time and time and time again to open up a seat at your table and say, come in. Jesus used a table so often within His ministry. In fact, one author wrote concerning Luke's gospel that in Luke's gospel, Jesus is either coming from a meal, at a meal, or going to a meal. He used a table often. What I want us to understand about generosity is sometimes the greatest show of generosity doesn't have to be $1 million given to the church or to somebody who's in need. The greatest show of generosity at times in our lives can be opening up a seat next to us at a table. Showing what David showed to Mephibosheth, kindness, love, generosity, can be something as simple as opening up a seat at the table. One last place I want us to look. One last point. I'm going to speed through it because I know I've been going for a little longer. What is in your hand? You see in Exodus chapter 3, you see a narrative. You see, we mentioned it this morning a little bit, the oppression of God's people. God wants to show generosity by removing the oppression from the Israelites. They're in Egyptian bondage. And the interesting part about that is they're in Egyptian bondage and He wants to take them to a land of milk and honey. And that's the beautiful part about God's generosity, by the way. The beautiful part about God's generosity is He doesn't just remove you from oppression. He wants you to be in a place of abundance. He doesn't want to just take you out of oppression. He wants to deliver you to a place of abundance. Now, I'm not preaching a prosperity gospel that if you give more money, that God's going to bless you more. No, what I'm trying to get you to understand is that God does not want to see His people oppressed. And even if deliverance from oppression does not come here on this earth, you can be assured, you can rest assured in knowing that God is delivering His faithful people to a place of abundance, where there is no need, where there is no lack, where there is nothing but fulfillment. God always delivers His people to that place of abundance. Notice that when it was time for the people of Israel to be removed out of the land of Egypt, God didn't just go and do it Himself. He chose a man by the name of Moses to go and lead His people out of oppression. Does God not do the very same thing with us? God notices the oppression of others, the lack or the need of others, of the poor, the widows, of the fatherless, of those who are in need. God notices these needs and He goes, here's my solution. It's my people. In the same way that God calls Moses to lead the people of Israel out of oppression, God has called us as Christians to lead people out of oppression, to help them when they're down, to meet them where they are and to help them in their needs. Notice the question that is posed in verse 11 by Moses unto God. Who am I? God, I'm just Moses. Who am I that you should send me before Pharaoh? I love God's response as He continues in with the narrative into verse 14. Basically, God says it doesn't matter who you are. It matters who I am. That's the most essential and important part of that message. But God doesn't really answer His question with, who am I? Who is Moses? He just reminds him who God is. And I think that's a friendly reminder that we need often. It doesn't matter who you are. God has used donkeys and He's used camels. He's used great fish. He's used all sorts of birds. He's used all sorts of animals to do His will. I'm pretty sure that God can use you to do His will as well. It doesn't matter who you are. It matters who He is. And that's what He's trying to get Moses to understand. And that's what Moses finally does understand. And then, so he gets this narrative of question after question, back and forth, back and forth. And finally, this very beautiful question is asked by God to Moses in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 2. This is the last verse that we're going to look at. So if you don't look anywhere else, look at this one last verse with me. Exodus chapter 4 and verse 2. Notice the question that Moses is asked by God. So the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" Moses responds, he says, "A rod." Now we know the story, right? He tells him to cast that rod down. It turns into a serpent. He tells him to pick that serpent up. It turns back into a rod. He uses that encouragement to send Moses. Moses goes and he gets the people out of exile because of the different plagues that were sent upon the people of Egypt. And Moses did all these wonderful things to lead them up to the point of the promised land where Joshua would finally take them in, all because he trusted in the Lord. But notice what that question is that God asked Moses. What is in your hand? God, I'm just Moses. I know I maybe had a noble early life, but I'm a shepherd. Who am I, Lord? Well, it doesn't matter who you are. It matters who I am. God, I feel underprepared. I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel like I've been given enough. I don't feel like I'm ready to be generous. I don't feel like I've worked hard enough or I've reached the goals that I want to reach in order for me to be generous. I don't have $1 million in the bank so I can give half of it to the Lord. I'm not there. Okay, Moses, what's in your hand? Moses, what do you have now? You think Moses could have benefited from 20 more years of leadership school before leading millions of people out of oppression? Absolutely. But that's not what God called him to do. He says, what's in your hand? What's here now? What's present now? Not what's going to be present. What's present now? Not what you're working towards. What's present now? That's God's call for generosity within us. You need to be generous. Not in 20 years. Not when you reach a certain amount in your bank account. Not when you fall into some sum of money. Not when you reach retirement. God says, what is in your hand now? This is a concept that we, in theory, practice with our children, but that we often forget. It's common practice for us to maybe give our kids $1. And what do they do with that dollar when the plate comes by? They put it in. They don't have a huge bank account. They don't have a Roth IRA or a 401k. They don't have a savings account built up. What do they have? They have what is in their hand, and what are they encouraged to do? Give it. Why don't we see the same principle within our own lives? God, I promise I'm going to give more. God, I promise I'm going to be more generous. God, I promise I'm going to meet more needs of others. I promise that if one day if I can just reach this goal, then I'll start giving back to you. God doesn't ask you for faithfulness in 20 years. God asks you for faithfulness right now. What's in your hand? What do you have right now that you can go and help somebody with? Maybe it's not money. Maybe the only thing that you have to offer unto others to meet their needs right now is a seat at your table. What's God's question? Still the same one He asked unto Moses. What's in your hand? What can you do right now to help others? If you've got $5 to feed somebody, use that $5. It doesn't have to be $500. Use that $5 to feed somebody. Why? Because God's response to greed is generosity. It's the enemy of greed. It's generosity, giving it away. God's response to helping those who are in need, like Mephibosheth, who cannot produce for themselves, or God's response to those who are unable to provide for themselves. Maybe that they're poor, they're hungry, they're a widow in need, they're an orphan. God's response to this is send my people to do my work. God, I don't know if I'm ready. Yes, you are. You've got something in your hand right now. Use it. Use what's there with you right now to be generous to others. God has called us not to be these great and grand, amazing things in the future. God has called us to use where we are right now to do His will. That's what we got to do. It's plain and simple. What's in your hand? Use it for the glory of God. Maybe it's the case this morning that you have never put on Christ in baptism. Maybe the most important thing that you have to offer unto others right now is to get your life right with God. It's to be cleansed from the waters of baptism, to rise, to walk in newness of life, to understand that the most beneficial that I can do, not only for me, but also for others, is to make sure that my soul is right with God so that I can then go and encourage others to be a follower of Jesus too. Or maybe it's the case this morning that maybe greed has taken root within your heart. Maybe it's even began to produce a sense of evil or some acts of evilness within your life. Remove it. Repent. Change your mind. Change your heart. Seek to remove those things and come before the congregation and say, I need help. Maybe it's simply the case that you need prayers of encouragement to say, you know what? Sometimes I do allow for my things to become more important to me than the people who I love. and the people who surround me within this world. God can use you where you are at today to be generous and to meet the needs of others. We just have to have the same faith like Moses and understand that it's not about who I am. It's about who He is. And He has called me to be generous. He has called me to meet the needs of others. He has called me to do something amazing. And I must do it no matter what situation I'm in. If it's the case this morning that you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, whether it be with baptism, with repentance, or simply prayers of encouragement, I would urge you and can make you consider the most important thing that you can do is to be right with God as we stand and as we sing.